Sally and Imogen, thank you so much for joining me on the days that follow. I'm so excited to have you guys here.
Thanks for having us. We are absolutely excited to be here.
Thanks for having us. It's so exciting to join you and talk about this super important topic.
Yeah, I mean, grief is a big one, and I think, what you guys have done with your podcast, Good Mourning, and now with your absolutely brilliant book, which I have a copy of here, and I absolutely have loved reading it. You've done such an amazing job. I mean, you're normalising what is a universal experience, but is so often brushed under the carpet, or, we talk about it when the shit hits the fan, but this is going to happen to everyone. Every single one of us in the world, in life, is going to experience grief. So why not be prepared for it, even if you're not in the midst of it right now? I think you guys have done an incredible job. You talk about your own experiences, which I'd love to kind of jump into a little bit, but also you've shared stories from your community and from experts. And what was that process like, putting all of that knowledge and information into one place?
I think it was really cathartic, actually. For us, we wanted to create something that felt like a support group in book form, which is very much like our podcast and our content, and something that talked really openly and honestly about grief, but gave the reader the right kind of tools to understand what they were going through, but also hear the stories of other grievers, because that was hugely important for us in our journeys, wasn't it?
Definitely. Yeah. And I remember when Sal and I sat down to write out the table of contents of the book, we're like, right, what do we want this book to be? What do we want it to look like? And we're like, there's so much information we get from our community members, and we wanted to put all of that into this book. And I think we did a really good job of it, because we found it quite hard kind of condensing everything into the different chapters, because there's so much that we wanted to say. But yeah, it's sort of a mix of everything that we hear day in, day out from our community.
And that was something that was really important for us. Like, what are the things that are happening to our community, that happen to us, the elements of grief that people don't talk about or don't know about and don't know how to support around. So that really informed the process, didn't it, Im? Because and like Im said, there's so much that we wanted to include. It was a real process of kind of picking the right topics, and I think we did a really good job of that, and highlighting the things that we need to talk more about in society around coping with grief, supporting around grief.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have really unpacked so many areas, and I think it's going to be so helpful for anyone going through grief, and even who have maybe friends and family that are going through it. But, you talked about your own experience. Should we start at the beginning? I mean, I was just saying to Sal before we started recording that, yes, I'm one of the unlucky people in this terrible club of suddenly dead mothers. And, I guess all of us now have a completely different path because of the worst thing that's ever happened to us. I don't think any of us would be sitting here today having this conversation if we hadn't been through the worst possible thing in the world. But, at the time, you can't possibly see that this might be the worst thing that happened, but leading to a new chapter and a new path. And if you rewind, is it 5 years for you guys since you lost your mum?
I've just had the 3-year anniversary, I think, last week, and Sal's in her 3rd year. So she's a few months ahead of me. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So it's still pretty fresh. If I think back, we're 20 years in April, which I can't even, saying that out loud just seems so ridiculous. How am I old enough to have lost my mum for 20 years? I was 21 when she died, so I've almost hit that mark for me, which
the
is
mark where longer. Yes, we've heard that is quite, quite a profound moment, and you just can't grasp how you've lived now longer than you've had that person in your life before.
Yeah. especially because your parent is such an enormous figure in your life, you know, and maybe it's, you know, particularly for women, I'm not sure, but she just seemed like such a huge and enormous part of my life. But my younger brother, he's now past, because he was 18 when she died, so he's now 2 years past that marker. And it just doesn't seem possible. Yeah, it's really hard to fathom. I've had these conversations before. So anyway, I digress, because once you start talking about grief, I mean, God, it goes everywhere. But maybe let's start a little bit about your stories. If you wouldn't mind sharing, for people maybe that don't know your stories, a little bit about those terrible mornings and how it was so different for you guys.
Sure. And just back to your point earlier about, you know, losing a parent so young, when you're 21 like you were, it's not part of the story, right? It's not what you expect, and you're going through such big life changes, you know, and your life's really just beginning. So to lose like a primary attachment, it's absolutely huge. And we're so sorry that you were part of the club as well. It is life changing, and I think that's what Im and I found our story. So my mum Rose passed away in November 2019 from a sudden seizure. It's called SUDEP, and it stands for the sudden and unexpected death in epilepsy, and she died in her sleep. And I was living in Australia, she was in the UK. I just got a phone call from her partner at 6 a.m. one morning saying, "Your mum's died," and it was just like my world just flipped upside down, and it's such a shock. It was so hard to comprehend, and I found myself on a flight like less than 24 hours later, going back to the UK completely unprepared, like trying to process that my mum was dead, and then I had to sort out all of her estate. I was the sole executor, so it was, for me, my experience was it was so clouded in shock for a long time. And because I had so much to get done, I felt like I couldn't process my grief really until I got back to Australia and the dust had settled a little bit. And then it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. But you just don't expect to lose a parent in your early 30s suddenly. And that is how Im and I connected, and I'll let Im tell a little bit more about that story. But it was it was a sudden loss. It was so unexpected because she was healthy, and it just completely upended my life.
So I'm part of the Sudden Loss Club as well. My mum died suddenly in February 2020, and she died by suicide. And I always like to preface my story by saying that my mum was probably the last person I could have ever imagined taking her own life. So it's really important for people to understand that suicide doesn't discriminate. She'd never experienced any previous mental health issues. She was going through a really tough time in her life. So I think it was what's called situational depression, and it just came as an absolute shock. I was a new mum at the time. My baby girl was 9 months old, and my mum was my biggest support and my biggest cheerleader and my go-to for absolutely everything. And it just completely pulled the rug from underneath me, and I honestly didn't think that I was going to survive at times. Like, it was so dark and so heavy. My grief took me by surprise. I think a lot of people who haven't been through loss assume that grief is just sadness. But for me, the sadness didn't kick in for a long time. Like, I was full of rage. I was struggling with guilt. I couldn't sleep. I was riddled with anxiety. So it was a lot of emotions and physical experiences that I wouldn't have ever expected. That's a big reason why we, started Good Mourning and wanted to have these conversations, because unless you've been through it, you've got no idea, what grief feels like. And both Sal and I felt really, really lonely. We were supported by our friends and family. We had great support, but we still felt lonely. So grief is a really lonely experience, and it led us to a support group. That's how we met. We met at a support group for motherless daughters, and we sat across the table from each other, and then Sal went up to go get a drink and someone took her spot. So we never actually got to speak properly on that day. And we went around the table and kind of asked each other how our mums had died, and we both lost our mum suddenly. We were similar ages. She was just my kind of person. Like we just felt this kind of gravitational pull towards each other. We vibed.
We vibed, didn't we?
We vibed. And then I reached out to her on Facebook that evening, and then the rest is history.
The love story, and like Im said, and Yana, you will probably know this as well from losing your mum when you were in your 20s. Like, it's lonely because if a lot of your peers haven't been through a loss, as much as they want to be there for you and they care about you, they just don't know what to say. And also the experience of grief, like Im said, people think it's just sadness, but it is so much more. And so when you're grieving, because society doesn't prepare you for it, or there's not a lot of conversations happening about what grief is really like, you're left wondering, like, okay, is this exhaustion normal? Like, is this anger normal? Like, am I normal for feeling numb and like just shocked? You know, there's all these things, and if you haven't got an outlet or a friend or somebody around to really talk to, it's so lonely, and you can wonder like what's happening to you. So for us, we connected over lots of things, but also like being in a similar place with our grief, we understood each other on a new level. And it's kind of a bit of a weird setting for a friendship to grow when you're like in the depths of pain, right? But we were able to really kind of shine a spotlight on each other's experiences and really understand each other, and that was so helpful. So that's what kind of catapulted us into starting Good Mourning, and the rest, they say, is history.
Yeah, but that connection, you know, I remember as you're talking about it, you know, I'm brought back to, you know, maybe the first 10 years, and anytime I would meet someone who had been through the sudden loss of a parent or somebody very close, we had that instant bond and connection that, you know, you just, it was even an unspoken thing that you just both got it, you know, you didn't have to explain it, and you could sort of have those little conversations like, oh, you know, I mean, how terrible, and then, oh, did you have this? Yeah, me too, and have you found that? And how, you know, just, it's like finding an Australian when you're, you know, hiking in Nepal or something. You're in this foreign place and everyone speaks a different language, and suddenly there's like a person that fully gets you and knows all your slang and knows exactly what you mean when you're saying something. It's just this, you know, beautiful, terrible connection.
It's so powerful. And am I allowed to swear on this podcast?
Go for it. Absolutely.
So I had a session with one of my coaching clients last night, and we were talking about grief, and he said his analogy was absolutely amazing, and it kind of ties back into that connection piece. He was like, you know, when you find people who've been through grief and loss, it's like you've both got a bucket of shit, and your shit is different flavors, but you understand each other because you're both holding the bucket. And I was like, I love that. It's so true.
Nailed it.
Not as beautiful as the hiking in Nepal,
so
Sal, but
yeah.
I don't know where that came from.
No, the hiking in Nepal is definitely much more beautiful.
we're all got the same bucket of
than
shit.
a bucket of shit.
That's it. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, really, yeah. It's just, it's a club nobody wants to be part of, but God, are you relieved to find that other people are in that shit with you, you know. And, you know, how beautiful that you guys, first of all, I want to commend you for actually going and finding a support group, because that is something that, you know, younger people are sort of less likely to seek out. So that's amazing that you were able to kind of advocate for yourselves. And
it's
just
interesting,
make that
though.
happen.
Sal and I have mentioned this before, but we are very much not your support group type of people, and it was very out of our comfort zone. And I think one of the big reasons as well why we started Good Mourning is we just felt like there just weren't enough relatable resources available to people our age or similar ages going through a big loss. And we were kind of like desperate. We were desperate. So we found Motherless Daughters on the I think I was searching for Hope Edelman's book, Motherless Daughters, and then the Facebook group popped up. And so I joined it. So it's an organisation called Motherless Daughters Australia, if anyone is interested in looking them up. And I remember like signing up to go to this event, and then everything in me was like, nah, this isn't for you. Pull out. What are you doing? You've got friends and family. You don't need this. But like we both felt a real pull to go. So we definitely grappled with it, and it wasn't 100% easy. Yep, I'm doing this. It was a very much I think a moment of desperation where I'm like, I need to speak to someone who knows what I'm going through, and which led us there. And I'm so bloody grateful that I did, because we often say, like, I don't know what my grief would look like if Sal and I hadn't have met that day.
Yeah, and it was a bit of a sliding doors moment, wasn't it? Because I very almost didn't go either, because I was like, I was late, yeah. Blame that on Sydney car parking though. But, you know, it was like, I think sometimes with support groups, there can be a little bit of shame around it, like, oh, you know, am I a bit sad for like wanting some support? Or, you know, also like feeling lonely, we can feel shame, right? And so I had to really push through that barrier, and I'm so glad that I did. But that's like Im said, you know, we became friends, and we were like, well, we felt there was a lack of relatable support for people, you know, in their 20s, 30s, 40s, that age when you're not really expecting a big loss. And we just felt there wasn't a lot of resources that really talked about grief in a relatable and honest way, and that's spurred us on to start Good Mourning and start those conversations, just like what you're doing through this podcast as well. But I think we wanted to also create a support resource for people that was really accessible and authentic.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And a lot of the research, I mean, everybody goes on and on about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the 5 stages of grief, which anyone who's been through grief knows is complete bullshit. You know, kudos to her, and her work was groundbreaking at the time, but we've well and truly moved beyond that. You know, there's so many other layers. Nothing happens in a linear fashion. Nothing sort of guarantees that you're going to experience one, any or all of those things, or you might feel everything all at once. And so, you know, you're right, there's not that much in a modern setting.
What's really interesting about those
helpful.
5 stages of grief, we interviewed David Kessler, who was protege to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she had identified those 5 stages actually in people who were in palliative care, who were dying. And over the years, they've been misinterpreted into people who were grieving a death loss of somebody. So, yeah, they've definitely been misinterpreted, and she never actually intended them to be for people who were grieving. So I don't know, somewhere along the way, they've just turned into the 5 stages of grief, which they're not. And, yeah, it's definitely not linear. And I definitely sat in anger for a long, long time and wondered if that would ever fade. And I think a lot of people think that, well, I guess if you haven't been through grief, that we can find some sort of closure in our loss as well, and then we reach the final point of acceptance and then move on from our grief. But that's not the case at all, as you both very well know. You know, I think grief it's a lifelong process, and it's forever going to change. You know, like you were talking about, you're about to surpass that marker in time where you've lived longer than your mum's been alive. And yeah, people who haven't been through it don't quite understand that, and they only support us for such a small window of time. And I think that is one of the big reasons why grief is so lonely and isolating.
Yeah, and I think as well, like thinking about the stages of grief, it's still one of the common things that pops up, right? When you're Googling grief, or you're fresh in, you know, after a loss, and you're like, what is going on? And then I think we really judge ourselves if we're not educated around the grief process and how it impacts us. And if we've got that as a marker, then we're thinking, well, I should be moving through this stage. So I think that's why having these conversations is so important for people to know, like, there is no timeline, it's not linear, and there's so much more than just the 5 steps. You know, it's huge, but often we can just berate ourselves and think, well, why am I like feeling this way and I'm not moving through this? And that definitely needs to change.
100%. And I think there's so many things like that along the way that we're so unfair on ourselves. maybe unknowingly, you sort of have these expectations of the way things should be moving, and should always be in inverted commas, because obviously there's no shoulds in any of this stuff. But, I remember thinking that the first year would be the hardest, and I just sort of had to get through that first year, and then something magical would happen at the anniversary of the first year and I could go back to living my normal life. But the old you just doesn't exist anymore after you've experienced something like this. There are elements of her that are still there, but you're forever changed on a completely cellular level. So how can you possibly go back to your old life and what that carefree existence where, you were naive to think that, life just went on and bad things only happen to bad people and all of those sorts of things. But those markers that we set, like imagining having to move through those 5 stages of grief or getting to a certain point in our grief, is going to drastically change everything. But as we all know, it's just something that evolves and changes as we do. So how do you find your grief has changed in the last 3 years? Is there anything, have there been any shifts
for me?
For you?
I think there was a lot of trauma added on top of my grief. So it's really important to separate the two. So grief and trauma are two very different things. And I think, I was very traumatized for the first year, at least. I think definitely the first 10 months, I was in so much shock and I was constantly ruminating. I couldn't get past the day that it happened and the events leading up to it and going through all of the should have, could have, would have. So that took a long, long time to process. And like you said, sometimes the first year isn't the hardest, and I completely agree. And that was definitely my experience. And I think once the shock wears off, the permanence of the death starts to sink in, and the reality of it is very frightening. It's like, oh, so I'm actually going to have to live the rest of my life now without my mum. And then it kind of shifted into like a deep sadness and yearning, and definitely around like when I hit that first year mark, it was deep sadness for me, and it was kind of the first time where I really felt that deep sadness. For me as well, what helped my grief evolve was understanding the mind and body connection, which I think we still need a lot of educating around, because people don't connect the dots and realize it actually impacts your whole being. Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, grief changes you. And so understanding that it was actually impacting my body and changing the cells in my body and changing my brain and rewiring my brain really helped me understand what I needed to do to help myself. And so I did a lot of like body work, like breath work and energy healing and acupuncture and physical exercise and those sorts of things to get the grief moving through my body. And once I understood that and I started really committing to consistent work, because it is work, grief is work. It's not something that just kind of happens if we sit back. We've actually got to actively do it. And I started to feel healing, a real shift in my grief when I understood that. So for me, that's how my grief has evolved, and definitely understanding that it impacts you physically as well has helped me to shift into a much, much better place. And I'm going to ramble here, but I love this topic. I had a lot of trauma prior to my mum dying, which I didn't even really identify as trauma. And since doing the work that I did, I feel like I actually shifted a lot of the other trauma that was obviously sitting under the bottom of the surface for me that I'd never identified. And I think I was always living in like this bit of a fight or flight mode, and I had suffered from really bad anxiety and really bad sleep and nightmares, and those things have gotten a whole lot better for me, since doing the grief work. So it's been a huge evolution for me on so many levels, and I'll let Sal, fill you in on her experience, but a huge time of personal growth as well.
That's amazing.
And for me too, I feel like grief has really unpacked a lot of other stuff for me. It's been the catalyst for huge personal change and personal development and growth. And for me, I think one of the biggest learnings has been that we all have different grieving styles, and by learning my grieving style, I've learned a lot about myself as well. So I would say like Im, like I probably spent the first year in survival mode really, and just coming to terms with what had happened, and then after, I would say about 18 months, I found that I moved into a bit more of a place where I could cope with my grief a little bit more. In the early days, it was a mix of shock and then these huge, we call them grief bombs. A lot of people call them the waves of grief, but we call them grief bombs because they sort of explode out of nowhere, and they could, this well as well, they can catch you off guard and just be all consuming. And I felt like after that 18 months mark, things eased a little, and I was more able to cope with the thoughts of my mum without feeling overwhelmed. But what's been really interesting is learning about how we all grieve differently. So Im and I, for an example, are very, very different in how grief impacted us. So like I mentioned earlier, I had to sort out my mum's estate, and I had to go back and organise the funeral and do all these practical things. And I coped really well at that. Like, I almost thrived organising it all. But I really judged myself. Why am I able to do all of these things? Why am I not on the floor, like crying constantly? And I went back to work after a couple of months, and I was doing well. And I was really, really berating myself and judging myself. And although I had the intense emotions and the grief bombs on a day-to-day level, I could function. And Im, on the other hand, was very, like, her grief was visceral. She was overcome with emotions, found it very hard to do anything practical. And what we've learned, and we explore this in our book, is that there are different grieving styles, and there's terms that have been coined by some researchers. I'm not sure if you've come across this before, Jana, about intuitive grievers and instrumental grievers. So instrumental grievers, like myself, find that they do more practical things, and they're able to maybe talk a bit more rationally about the person who died, whereas intuitive grievers like Im can't help but feel their emotions. They need to talk about how they're feeling, like they are overcome with emotions. And it's a spectrum. Some people are a bit of both, some people are on the extremes. But I found that really helpful to understand me and how I cope with things more generally. And we had a podcast guest on the other week who said something really interesting about grief. And she said to grieve, and like grief is a verb. To grieve is to do, kind of like what Im just said earlier. But for me, to grieve was to be practical. And it's only now that I really understand, 3 years in, like, actually I was grieving when I was doing that stuff. Just because I wasn't howling doesn't mean that I wasn't grieving. And I think that's really important for people to know as well. Like, there is really no one size fits all. And if you think you're coping, great, don't judge yourself. There are lots of different ways that we process things.
Oh, that is just, there's so much in that. And thank you both for sharing so much of that, because I know that's deeply personal stuff to kind of get into your experience and what worked for you. And I just wish that 20 years ago podcasts existed and communities like this existed, because I really was, surviving through this on my own. I would, of course, talk to friends and family, but, everyone's sort of like, who wants to keep hearing the same misery all the time, and me trying to verbalize how I'm feeling to try and process this, impenetrable loss. But, thinking that there's all these different ways to explain how you're feeling, how your grief is presenting, that, the concept of that being a spectrum, I just have 1,000 little flashes of myself in those early years, and I just feel really sad for her that none of this was there. I just think talking about all of this is just so, so important.
Where do you think you identify, Jana? I'd love to know, because I know that you kind of fell into doing a psychology degree like really quickly after your mum died as well. So do you kind of identify more with Sal's experience?
I was wondering because on the one hand, if I flash back to those early years, I see myself, in the hallway at my family home, like nobody's home, and I've just literally gone from standing to crawling to lying on the floor, howling in the, deepest pain. But then also I'm the older sibling, and it was sort of like, in a way, I became parentified a little bit because it was like, okay, so now it's us and this is what we're doing. Okay, so we need to do this. And so, there is a part of me that I guess thrives in the doing of things. I like to be busy. I like to have tasks. I like to kind of keep going. I would like to be more of a person that could just sit and howl and not move for days, but I'm not fully that either. So I think it would also depend on the setting. And I don't know if that's how it works, but there would be some people I'd be more likely to allow myself to cry and be really raw and vulnerable with. And there'd be probably the majority of people actually that I interact with. I would be practical about it and say, yes, and it's terrible and it's fucked, and, be emotive with my language, but not allow myself to dip into the reservoirs of pain that, are just sitting there for that personal
you might be a real mix of both, but it's interesting there that you mentioned, like, you kind of had to step up into that role as you were the eldest. And I think that's another big experience that a lot of people have to cope with, which is the role shifting and the dynamics changing in families, which can come with so many other responsibilities on top of your grief, which can make it so much harder to cope with. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, because every part of your life changes, and we all know that from a, rational point of view. Yes, of course, everything changes, but literally everything changes, and in ways that you can't even fathom, and it never ends. Now I have 3 young kids, and it's this constant bittersweet experience of, she's not here, and I'm robbed yet again of a future and a, fantasy of what that could have looked like. And, I've got incredible family and so many beautiful women in my life, especially, my mum's sister I'm extremely close with, and she's like, the stand-in for my mum all the time. But it's not the same, and you always want her, and that sort of never changes. I'm not on the hallway floor anymore. I'm much more able to live with it. But then there are those moments where you just think, oh, it's just so unfair, and you feel again isolated and a bit alien from maybe the people around you who haven't gone through that.
And I think, like you say, everything changes, and you change as well. Like, quite often we change as people. Maybe it's the connections that we have no longer serve us, or some don't serve us, or the interests that we have change, or we don't have as much time for small talk, or so you change so much as well, and that can impact lots of areas of your life, and people might not realize that either.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that sort of comes up when I'm talking to people is, and look, as humans, we can't help doing this, but that comparison all the time of different kinds of grief, is one better than the other? Is one worse? Is one harder? Is one, takes longer to get over, quote unquote? But that's just so unhelpful, and we have to just think about it in terms of our own lives. But it's just something we can't help doing. So even when you're going through your experiences, do you ever compare notes in terms of, oh, well, for me it's more like this, and for me it's
a lot of the experiences we have are similar, but obviously, as Sal has just mentioned, we have very different grieving styles. So we are on the end of the spectrum, and I think we both judged ourselves a lot in the early days when we didn't have all of this information at hand. But there's something that David Kessler said to us as well, which we found really helpful. And he's like, I think the worst type of grief, or the most important grief, is your own grief. Like, you can't compare losses. It's all relative, and I think there is a bit of a grief hierarchy that people think, and I think a lot of the time it's natural for people to compare, but it doesn't help. And I think it can end up minimizing people's experiences. And I think, everyone's relationship with the person who died is going to be so unique too. So of course your grief is going to be unique to you. There's no point comparing losses.
Yeah, there's no one size fits all to grief, and everyone's grief is valid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so since doing the podcast and writing the book, has there been anything that's really surprised you? Has anything, you're old hands at grief now, like you know it inside out. And are there ways that it can still surprise you, something you're learning or something you're experiencing?
I think that it's so physical, like Im mentioned earlier. That's really surprising at first, because quite often we think, why am I so exhausted? Why have I got headaches? Why is my anxiety really high? But what I've noticed now, and I think it's the same for Im, is I know when I'm feeling griefy because my body's telling me, and I'm constantly learning about my grief and my emotions through the way that I'm feeling. And it's only when you're really tuned into that, I think, that you start to really notice it. And Im's got an example of this, haven't you, Im, from the other week?
Which example? See, this is the thing, it still affects my memory because I've got grief brain. What is it?
Well, your mum's anniversary, right? And you felt so white.
Yeah. No, this is a big one. And Sal will still message me sometimes after all of this work, after writing the book, after speaking about it for over 2 years. She'll be like, oh my God, I'm just so tired. What's wrong with me? Like, and I'm like, Sal, it's grief. It's totally fine. But I was having a similar experience to Sal. We kind of did have similar 3-year anniversary feelings, which was interesting. It was less of an emotional crying on the floor, thinking about it constantly, but it was more of a physical exhaustion. So that took us both by surprise, and I definitely felt it in the days leading up, because I often find the anticipation for the anniversary, or the death anniversary, is often much harder than the day itself. And I was really snappy and irritable and exhausted and moody, and I just wanted to go to bed. And I was like, well, that's grief reminding me that the day's coming up. So that's been surprising.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. There've been a number of years where I've been almost like that, that feeling like just before you get your period, and then, you get your period and you're like, oh, that's why I've been so tired or cranky or whatever. And it's the same thing. I had those same things where I was exhausted and just really emotional, and I just had no clue why. And then it's like, it's April 10th tomorrow. Okay, got it. Okay. So, it's crazy that it's so visceral in every part of your life, but you can just, still be sneak surprised by it. But, the other thing I was going to ask you guys is whether you do anything in particular around anniversaries or birthdays or Mother's Day. Are there ways that you prepare for that or celebrate or acknowledge your mums?
I think this is where having a grief buddy comes in really handy. Like, I'm wearing some earrings right now. I don't know if you can see them, but Sal bought these for me the other day on my mum's death anniversary, and they got my mum's birthstone in them. So everyone needs to get themselves a friend like Sal. She gives the most thoughtful gifts around, the anniversary, and honours my mum in such beautiful ways. Like, my mum loved op shopping, and Sal loves op shopping. Like, there's so many similarities with Sal and my mum. It's actually wild. Like, I don't know how woo-woo we can get on this podcast, but in a lot of ways I feel like we were sent to each other by our mums. So Sal goes op shopping in honour of my mum and will pick out things for me that she thinks my mum would buy me. My mum used to give me this thing called magic bags, which would be like full of secondhand clothes that she'd get from her friend or the op shop, and now Sal gives me magic bags, and it's so cute. But there's so many ways to honour your loved one, and it doesn't have to be, a grand gesture, a grand event. It can be really simple things like listening to their favourite music, cooking their favourite meal, writing them a letter, simple ways to connect with them. And I think that was important for us to understand, like, sometimes those anniversaries can feel really overwhelming, but you don't have to do anything that you're not feeling ready or comfortable to do. So yeah, it changes as well every year, like depending on how we're feeling, in what ways we want to honour our mum or ourselves as well.
Definitely. And for me, I have my mum's ashes. They're scattered on a headland near where I live, so I'll go and walk there and, you know, pass her, and sometimes I sit and have a little chat in my head, or sometimes I just continue, you know, walking after I've paused. But it's little things like that that you can do not only on the anniversaries or the big days, but every day as well. Or things like maybe wearing their favourite perfume or a piece of jewellery that was theirs. There's lots of ways to keep them close without feeling like you've got to do something big, because quite often we just don't have the energy or the mental capacity to try and do something big when we're in the depths of grief.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've got another one. It's, again, spiritual. Can we go a bit spiritual? Are you here for it? Okay. So another thing that we talk a lot about on our podcast, and it's probably our most popular topic, is signs from the universe. And we interviewed Laura Lynn Jackson. So we're still kind of coming down from that high of interviewing her. She's incredible, the author of the book Signs. And here we go, it's my grief brain again. What was the other? The Light Between Us. And she's absolutely phenomenal. So we learned all about, like, that death isn't the end, and the relationship with the person who died doesn't end when they die. And we found that so comforting and helpful, because we feel like, okay, well, maybe we can still have some form of relationship with our mums. It's obviously not physical, and we wish that it was, but we'll take what we can get at this point. So we started asking our mums for signs, and we got them. And we're like, oh my God, this is like absolutely incredible, because it just gives you that little bit of like comfort and hope that maybe they are still out there in some form and guiding us and protecting us. And obviously not everyone's open to it, but we have found, and a lot of our community members have found, a lot of comfort in that. And asking for signs around the anniversary can be really helpful, and when you get it, is a really nice feeling. So yeah, that's something that has been helpful for both of us.
Definitely, and I think don't be disappointed if you do ask for a sign and you don't get one either. Laura Lynn Jackson's work is really great if you're interested in that in the topic to read more about. But you've also got a really nice ritual that you do with your daughter to honour your mum, like every day, which is really lovely, isn't it?
With the picture. Yeah,
and also, you know, the little ways that Layla acknowledges your mum.
I don't know if you do any kind of things with your boys, Yana, but anytime we see a blay, we're like, oh, there's grandma, and I have a photo of my mum in her bedroom, so always like saying goodnight to grandma. So she very much knows who grandma is, even though I know she's not going to remember her, and that's really painful for me. But yeah, we have little rituals that we do together, and it's so funny. Like one time it just went a bit too far, but it was hilarious. There was a bit of sock lint on the bed, and my daughter just went, oh, Mum, it's grandma, and picked up this bit of sock lint. I was like, oh God, she wouldn't be happy that she's like turned into a bit of fluff. But it's like, no, a bit of sock lint. So it was hilariously heartbreaking. But yeah, so she's still very much alive in my daughter's life, even though I know she won't technically remember my mum, or she may in some other form. But I think kids can be quite spiritually open as well. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I'm all about those signs and the spirit world. And, you know, I leaned very heavily on a psychic in the years after my mum died, because, you know, I went in to see her and she immediately started giving me messages and saying, your mum's telling me this. And I had given her nothing except just Yana, no surname, nothing. She couldn't have looked anything up anywhere. And she had so much information that was so specific that it wasn't general, you know, stab in the dark. It was so accurate, and I was just like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I just had so many signs, but, you know, I hadn't had one for years, it felt like. And only a few months ago, my mum's perfume, we were getting the kids, it was all chaotic, and we're trying to get the kids into the shower, and, you know, I could just smell her perfume so strongly. And I said to my partner, I'm like, can you smell that? And even he could smell it. I'm like, this is my mum's. And I went and got her issey miyake, which I still have, you know, in the bathroom. I said, smell it. It's this. Like, how is this everywhere? And it followed me. It was in my little baby's, you know, room. And then it was following me wherever I went. It was just inexplicable.
Wow,
but
I love that.
you have to just take those, don't you? Yeah.
And scent has such a strong, like it brings back such memories, and it's incredible how just smelling that scent reminds you straight away of your mum, like you've not forgotten her smell after all these years, which is incredible.
Yeah.
It's the most powerful of the senses, isn't it? It can really take you back there to a time and a place or with a person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm all for the signs, and I think people should definitely go and see psychic mediums and, you know, look for the signs themselves. And, you know, it just gives you that little bit of comfort that maybe they are still around, and there is, you're not,
in our book we share some sign stories from our community too, and sort of steps to take, or things to help you if you potentially have asked for signs and haven't received them. So there are some things that you can do to kind of open you up a bit more to receiving them, because you've got to be very perceptive and open up and always keep an eye out, and be patient too, which is another thing that I think people like, I haven't got it in like 5 minutes, but they will eventually come. Yeah
Exactly. And you know, when I was reading your book, and I was actually thinking to tell you guys this, it just totally slipped my mind until now, but I was sitting on the couch reading your book and the radio was on, and Mama I Love You came on by the Spice Girls. Like, that is from the, you know, the
never
early
hear
90s.
that song.
You know, it was a random, like, I would never normally have the radio on. My partner had left it on. It was just softly on in the background, and I was reading about your mums, and then that song just came on. And I was like, oh, that has to be...
Definitely.
That's definitely something,
that
right?
is not a song that you hear often. You might hear it around Mother's Day, right? But not every day.
Exactly, yeah. And it's this 90s, you know, digital radio station that he puts on occasionally. And there's about 10 songs that they sort of just replay all the time. And that one is never on there. So, you know, I thought that was pretty special. Yeah. Now, look, I know we're getting close to time, but is there anything else that you think, I mean, you've shared so much already, and it's just, I mean, I can only... you know, I couldn't compel people more to go and get your book, because I really think it's fantastic. But if we leave listeners with maybe one last thought, something that you think would be helpful, that maybe you wish you'd heard, or that you find helpful to share with people who are going through grief now, what would you like them to know?
I think for people supporting in the days after a loss, show up, keep showing up, be consistent. If you're asking somebody who's coping with loss how they are, reframe it and say, how are you today? Because it gives them the opportunity to be more likely to open up and talk to you about how they're really feeling. And if you are grieving, just know that you're not alone, that there are others walking this path beside you, and that hopefully this conversation would have shown you that everything that you're going through, whether it's exhaustion or some anxiety, like, it is normal.
I think if you're in the early stages of loss, one of the best advice I had was just strip everything back and take things like minute by minute, because looking into the future can feel super overwhelming and impossible at times. So just go micro and just focus, okay, I just need to get through this next minute. I need to try and nourish myself with some food, drink some water, like just strip everything right back and let go of expectations of how you think you should be. So that was really helpful for me. And I still hold on to that sometimes when I'm having a bad day. I'm like, just get through this next minute. You know, you're not going to feel this heavy forever. And I think that's really important for people to understand. I think a lot of the time, like, people may say to you, it never gets easier. And while in a sense that is true, it does change. And so the heaviness that you may be feeling now won't always feel this heavy. You will feel lighter. I know I would wake up every morning for a good year and a bit, and it would be my first thought, my mum's dead, it would just scream in my head. And like, I was like, am I ever going to wake up and feel any sort of peace again? It just felt like that was never going to happen and so far out of reach. And I do wake up now and it's not my first thought. Some days it is, but a lot of days it isn't. So I just want to give listeners that little bit of hope that even in the depths of darkness, like there will be some light again in your life.
That's beautiful. Brilliant advice from both of you. Thank you. I mean, I could just sit here and talk about this
Well, it's
stuff
good that you've
all
started
day
this
long,
podcast,
honestly.
so you get to do that, which is amazing.
Well, that's right. That's right. I know my friends and
Get
family
over it,
probably
yeah.
like, oh, another grief thing. Yeah, great. Yeah, exactly.
We get it.
I know, but we get it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, girls, thank you so, so much for your time today. Thank you for your beautiful work and keep it up. You've created some amazing, amazing, amazing communities and this book is incredible. And, you know, I just can't wait to see what
It's
comes
so
next
lovely
for
to
you
chat with
guys.
you, and thank you for the work that you're doing. It's super important too. And the more conversations that we can have about grief, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you, Yana. It's been so lovely to chat all things grief with you, and yeah, really excited for this podcast as well. And yeah, thanks so much for your encouragement and support.